Here's something that most people do not realize. My mom, I was just chatting with the other day, and she was just shopping on Amazon, and she's like, "Wow, Amazon carries everything." And like, you realize, Ma, that these are all individual sellers that are selling on Amazon, and she didn't even know that, right? So I guess my key takeaway here is there are a lot of people selling their own products as part of these larger organizations that you don't realize. Now, it's probably obvious with eBay, but for organizations like Amazon and Walmart, most people don't realize that there's a ton of sellers on that platform. And it's not Amazon supplying everything. And that if you have a good product, you can take advantage of these large marketplaces and make a good amount of money.
Want to launch an e-commerce business but don't know where to begin? Steve Chou, founder of MyWifeQuitHerJob.com, shares secrets that help you start selling online even if you've never experimented with e-commerce before. Don't miss this in-depth discussion coming up next. Well, could you just for a moment tell everybody kind of what you sell, what your store does?
Yeah. So my wife and I, we run a store called Bumblebee Linens, where we sell handkerchiefs and linens for special occasions. And then on the digital side, I also sell, courses. I'm in the media and that sort of thing. And I don't count that as e-commerce, but Bumblebee Linens definitely is e-commerce.
So, Steve, let's start with a simple definition. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who know the answer to this, but there are a lot of people who maybe don't or don't know all the aspects of it. There are all kinds of online businesses out there, but when we're talking about e-commerce, what kind of businesses are we specifically talking about?
I mean, technically, e-commerce is really just a sale of things online. But the specific type of e-commerce that I refer to as e-commerce is the act of selling physical products online.
As opposed to
Courses, memberships, downloadables. I mean, technically, ebooks is also e-commerce. I'm just referring to just the sales of physical products, like an Amazon.com, for example.
What kind of e-commerce businesses are there? I mean, you covered a couple of them, but there's all kinds of e-commerce businesses. Could you give us just a broad overview of the kind of things that you've seen?
Well, at the core, it's really about selling physical products, but the sourcing and the delivery mechanism will change. There's different models for that. One, there's dropshipping. Dropshipping is when you take orders on your store and you have this agreement with the supplier where when an order comes in, the supplier stores the inventory and ships it to the end customer. And a good dropshipper will actually include your brand in the packaging so that it appears to be coming from your store. And the dropshipper is really just a supplier, essentially. This is the cheapest way to get started in e-commerce because you don't have to worry about inventory. And you just basically take the sale and you perform customer service. The second type is the one that most people are familiar with. This is where you buy someone else's product. Like, let's say I want to carry iPhones and I buy them at the wholesale price, which is usually 50%. And then I store it. I'm responsible for inventory. And then when a sales comes in, I deliver it to the end customer. That has a much higher margin than drop shipping, but obviously you have to deal with inventory. The next business model is called private label. This is where you create your own branded product. Like, you're literally working with the factory. You create something that you call your own, you put your brand on it. You have to buy in larger quantities and then you sell them, but the margins are infinitely higher in this business model and you have full control over the entire process. Sales, customer service, the entire supply chain. Incidentally, private label is probably the best way to start a long-term business because you're building your own brand at this point. And then this final business model it's kind of like this final business model I would call is selling on Amazon or relying on a marketplace. So I categorize like Etsy, eBay, Amazon, Walmart all in this category. This is where you're basically outsourcing your customer base. So I'm taking advantage of Amazon's traffic, right? So I list something on Amazon. Amazon already gets a ton of traffic. I get a sale. They take a big cut. And in the case of Amazon, they'll actually handle your fulfillment for you as well. So I would say those are the four main business models of e-commerce.
I wonder if we should ask how you go about finding a drop shipper and then maybe also how you get inventory if you're not getting it manufactured.
So let's break down each model. So for drop shipping, there's actually directories out there of companies that are willing to drop ship, right? There's worldwide brands, there's AliExpress based stores like Sale Who, directories where you can just find drop shippers. Like, they do that. There's also print on demand companies. Now, in terms of wholesale, all you got to do is just go to like a trade show in the US. I would go on a place like Wholesale Central. There's a schedule of all the trade shows all around the US, and you just go over there and you say, "Hey, I'd like to, buy some of your products. What is your minimum order?" Incidentally, indirectly, you can find drop shippers this way also. If you have a relationship with a vendor where you've sold wholesale for a while and you already have this trust established, you can say, "Hey, I want to carry more of your other products, but I want to experiment to see what works. Can we have some sort of drop shipping agreement with some of your other products?" It's all about networking and talking when it comes to finding suppliers, really, because the relationship is so important, right? In the case of drop shippers, it's even more important because they have to be reliable as well and deliver the product on time.
Okay, I have something original. I want to do this as a private label. Where do I find somebody to make this? How do you go about finding this kind of supplier?
These days, most people don't like to accept this, but most things aren't manufactured in the US today, right? I mean, it's just a fact. Most things are manufactured in China and other third world countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and that sort of thing. So, I mean, if you want the lowest prices, you're going to need to go there. And there's a bunch of search engines that will help you find these. There's Alibaba, there's Global Sources. What we do today is we actually have an agent that actually lives over there. And whenever we need something, we just tell them what we need and they go find it. And you pay like a finder's fee of usually around 5%. So finding a supplier over there is actually not that difficult. You just need to know where to look.
You started an e-commerce business of your own, but if you were going to give advice to somebody who was just starting out, where would you tell them to start?
Yeah, I think that largely depends on what your starting budget is going to be. So I would say, let's say you have less than 100 bucks. You're pretty much limited to drop shipping, right? Uh, if you have, I'd say like 1,000 bucks maybe, then you can get by doing traditional wholesale. Like if you go with wholesale, let's say in the United States, the minimum orders are on the order of like 100 or 200 bucks per product. So, I can see, starting out with a single product and selling it well, you can probably get by with like 1,000 bucks or so. If you have, I would say $3,000, I would go private label. And in fact, I think private label should be everyone's end goal because you want your own brand. Now, that's not to say that you can't do all three, right? So if you want to play it safe, what you can do is you can drop ship a certain family of products. And this is, again, when you're selling someone else's product, figure out what sells. And then for your winners, you start by just buying those, wholesale, making more margin. And if it does really, really well, you can consider making your own branded version of that particular product. So all three models aren't mutually exclusive, but you're always trying to work towards that private label in the end. And it just really just depends on your risk tolerance and how much budget you have to invest. Obviously, the more that you're willing to risk, the greater the rewards.
When somebody asks you what are the best products to sell online, what the heck do you say? Because people ask that all the time. Like if they just knew that perfect product to sell, they'd make $1 million and could retire.
So I think it just depends on your skill set. Like I'm of the belief that you can make anything sell with the right marketing. But let's just assume that people out there aren't expert marketers. I would say that the best way to get started and thinking about a product is something that you need yourself. We started our store because when my wife and I got engaged to get married, my wife, she's a crier, right? And so we spent all this money on photography for our wedding, and she knew she was going to cry, and she didn't want to be seen in the photos, using these nasty tissues to dry her tears. So we looked all over the place for handkerchiefs. We couldn't find any in the US. The only place we could find handkerchiefs, ironically, was in China, and we had to buy in bulk because it was a factory. We ended up buying a whole bunch. We used maybe a handful of them, and we just tried to liquidate the rest on eBay, and they ended up selling like hotcakes. All right, so that's our story. Uh, it really just requires some brainstorming. Like even today, I can think of a bunch of things that I could potentially want to sell. Like right now, it's cold in California, and I like to play ultimate frisbee. And When I play, my hands get really cold and they get numb. But if I go out and buy like football gloves or soccer gloves, they're too thick. So I lose feel of the disc. So as far as I know, there aren't that many. I can't find, I don't know of anyone selling these ultimate Frisbee gloves. And that's something I might pursue. All right. So scratch your own itch. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to use tools. So there are tools out there like Jungle Scout that scrape all the Amazon listings and will tell you approximately how much money they're generating, in a given month. And what you can do is, if you want to do your research on Amazon, you can look at a couple things. You can look at the sales numbers and you can look at the number of reviews. The number of reviews reflects how mature a particular Amazon listing is. And what you want to see in general is listings that have like less than 100 reviews. That indicates that that product isn't that mature. You want to see like an even distribution of revenue. And most importantly, you want to make sure that if you see a product that's selling pretty well, that you can put your own spin on it. And again, this all kind of leads to the private label realm. You want to sell something that's better than everyone else or different. You just have to stand out. And by doing that and using a tool, you can make the research process that much faster.
I have an idea what product I'd like to start with. Now I got to figure out where I'm going to sell this. And, you hear about Shopify, of course, you hear about Wix e-commerce, you hear about Squarespace, but there's also listing it, like you said, on a third-party site, maybe to get started, eBay or Amazon. And then I guess you could hire a developer and build your own store. What's the best option? Or is there a best option, or does it depend on your business?
The way I always teach it is to validate your product on marketplaces like eBay and Amazon with the goal of starting your site. So driving traffic is hard, and you obviously don't want to spend all this time and money on your own website unless you know you're going to follow through, right? So why not start selling on a marketplace like Amazon or eBay that has a built-in audience? See if your thing's going to sell in the first place. And I would say once you reach a certain threshold where you believe that you're going to follow through with the product, then work on your website and try to drive the majority of your traffic there. Marketplaces are just good for cash flow. The problem with the marketplaces is that like Amazon doesn't even give you the name of the customer anymore, actually. So it's impossible to market to an existing customer. So I would say, in the long run, you always want to have your own store because you own the customer. And in reality, repeat business is the lifeblood of any e-commerce store. You want to get people to buy from you again and frequently and in large dollar amounts. So the goal actually should be to sell everywhere. Like Amazon, for example, owns over 50% of e-commerce. You pretty much need to be on there, right? Otherwise, you're foregoing 50% of the target customers. You want to add an online store so that you can actually retain your customers, build brand loyalty, and establish an audience.
So the question that you hear all the time is, can you start an online, store with little or no money?
Okay, so if you have no money, I would start a marketplace like eBay or Amazon. If you have a little bit of money, I would still start my own online store. There's actually a bunch of shopping carts that are free as long as you use their payment processing. Shift4Shop is one of these. You can also use WooCommerce, which is free. You need to pay for hosting, but you can literally get started with Woo for $3 a month. So we're talking $36 a year. I mean, that's like less than going out to eat these days, right? Less than a meal. So it's not a question of whether you have enough money. You have enough money. Those are two options that are very inexpensive. And if you literally have $0, then, Etsy, eBay, Amazon.
Well, that's it for another episode of Small Biz in 15. Thanks again to Steve Chou. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the show, and please leave a comment and let us know what topics you'd like to see covered in future programs. For more small business news and tips, join us at smallbiztrends.com.